Session number 2, Decoding Proposition 4, Ensuring Effective Water Funding in California's Climate Bond. Let's take a look now at some man-of-the-street interviews.
Have you heard about Proposition 4, the climate bond? What do you think it's all about?
Well, I recently came to know about it, that it's to protect the environment, wildlife, and things related for, betterment of the state and environmental in general. As long as, it's a right step in a right direction, bit too late in a sense that it should have been there far before, but then it's never too late to start, right? So yes, it should be good for everyone.
Well, I have heard about it, and I find it also vague that it's hard to support. How can you support something that is so vague? Like nothing is specific or clear.
I actually have not heard of the proposition, so as I mentioned, I still need to get educated on as far as what the propositions are.
When you think about climate bonds, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
Well, obviously, like the climate, weather, and stuff like that.
Good answer.
I think it's a good idea, but yeah, it has to actually be backed up by policies that are proven to work.
What do you think should bear the most responsibility for funding climate change initiatives? Government, businesses, or individuals?
Good question. I believe it's all of us because we live in the same world, so the effort should be with, the responsibility should be with everybody.
Individuals. So I mean, if we look at it from, like I kind of touched on, was when you look at countries that kind of start going above a certain GDP, a certain economic level, that's when the climate concerns really start to become a factor. Because like I said, people are too busy otherwise worried about drinking water, just basic survival conditions. So once we could get those sort of basic human necessities down, then I feel that kind of comes naturally. Then we start looking at things like electric cars, we start looking at alternative fueling methods, and we start throwing a lot of money at it because we have the capability to do so. It's a little different when California or any other government body is like, no, you have to. Like, for example, what happened with the electric car thing. They're like, oh, by the year 35 or something, all cars are going to be electric cars. And then literally 2 days after they said that, they go, oh, power grid's a little overloaded. If everyone could just not for a couple days, maybe turn off your AC, that'd be cool, guys. And so it's like, it's a perfect example of them trying to push decisions on people without it necessarily having a infrastructure set up to do so, if that makes sense. So once we get that infrastructure set up, we'll get people actually caring about the environment in a way that's not like this fear-mongering, like, oh, the sky's gonna fall, like that sort of thing. It's gonna be a little more effective to getting people on board and getting people interested in this sort of thing, because more often than not, like people just immediately tune it out. They're like, oh, environmental stuff? They're like, oh, it's gonna be some hippie, or it's gonna be some whatever, like asking all these goofy questions. And how do we get the masses kind of engaged on a more personal level that makes more sense to them? Especially when we're talking local government, because that's where we make the most change, right? Is local provinces, not just like, oh, the federal government, and just shouting at the sky. That doesn't really get a whole lot done, so.
Okay, let's focus, class. Here we go. Session number 2. Proposition 4 is a pivotal climate bond aimed at addressing California's pressing climate issues, with a portion earmarked for water-related projects. Today, we're joined by 3 esteemed speakers who will offer diverse perspectives on Proposition 4. They are Adam Probolsky, a seasoned pollster, who will present the latest public sentiment data and provide a forecast on how the bond is expected to fare in the upcoming November election. Soren Nelson from the Association of California Water Agencies will discuss ACWA's concerns and explain their neutral stance on the bond. And then finally, Liz Forsberg Pardi, California Policy Director of the Nature Conservancy, will share insights from the environmentalist perspective. Let's begin. Adam, to start with you, give us an overview of the latest public sentiment. Where do we stand? I know polls are always just a photograph in time, but where do we stand right now?
You do me great service by saying that. Thank you. So as of right now, there's public numbers, and we have some, so I'm going to kind of conflate some of the data, but it shows that it's passing. I think it's important to understand a couple dynamics about this particular ballot and what it says. So first of all, if you're not familiar, I mean, or you don't remember seeing it, ballot labels that you actually sit at your kitchen table and see as you fill out your ballot say a bunch of words. And then this year, starting, we start to see who the supporters and who the opponents are. And so it's right there in front of you. And so let me just say who they are, right? You've got Clean Water Action, CAL FIRE, firefighters, Wildlife Federation, Nature Conservancy, and the opponents is Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association. That's a pretty hefty group that are supporting it, and there's something in there for everybody, and in the ballot measure itself, there's something in there for everybody, right? We talked about wildfire prevention and water and protecting communities and lands and audits. So it's a little bit hard to be opposed to it in some capacity because there's something in there. There's kind of a kitchen sink sort of approach. So right now, it's winning, and we'll see what changes.
Soren, ACWA is neutral on Proposition 4. Why are you at that stance, and what are your concerns about it?
You know, I was at a conference a couple weeks ago, and it was one of those plated dinner sort of things where you get the rubber chicken and the quinoa, and you get a piece of cheesecake at the end of the lunch talk. I don't particularly like cheesecake, but if someone puts it in front of me, I'm going to eat it. And that's sort of how I feel about the bond, which is, this isn't what I ordered, but I will eat it. You know, to Adam's point, there is something in there for everybody, and I think that's part of the problem and part of the reason that Aqua had a hard time getting to a full support is that this bond is trying to do a lot with not a lot of money. And the priorities that Aqua identified that we wanted to see reflected in a bond have been pretty diluted by a lot of other things that are in there. Aqua's a big tent organization. We have almost 500 member agencies. We represent over 90% of the water that's moved and used in the state. And we need to represent what our members are actually looking for, which is a lot of things. And frankly, a lot of those things just didn't make it in. I will say, in fairness, a lot of our members are in support because they have more narrowed interest. But you know, as a large statewide organization, we just couldn't get there.
Got you. Liz, Nature Conservancy's all in on Prop 4. What do you see as the positive aspects of it?
Yeah, so Prop 4 is really the first attempt to comprehensively address climate change by building resilience to our infrastructure, to our communities, and the management of our natural systems. And without intervention, the cost of climate change is going to cost $113 billion annually by 2050, just in California alone. So Prop 4 is really attempting to shift from disaster response to more of a disaster prevention before the damages become too costly. So really thinking about how we can invest in preventing wildfires or providing safe drinking water or, again, protecting our communities. Prop 4 invests in our ability to address the impacts from climate change, really, and that's really why the Nature Conservancy has been engaged. And as we all have experienced weather whiplash here in California that makes our water and our water system so vulnerable to climate change, Prop 4 invests $3.8 billion in water recycling, drinking water supplies, dam safety, groundwater, and flood management. It also invests $1.5 billion in wildfire prevention, something that we're all experiencing across the state of California and really feeling the impacts from climate change and the impacts from wildfires.
Awesome, thank you. Adam, as a pollster, you can often drill down on people's opinions about stuff. What are the aspects of Proposition 4 that people seem most interested in or concerned about? And are there places in California that are more interested in this proposition than we are in Orange County?
Sure. So I'll go with your second part first. No surprise, right? Bay Area is most supportive. Southern California, kind of lesser so, meaning outside of Los Angeles County. So there are some nuances of the campaign, which I don't think is going to be so well funded. But I will tell you, here's the secret sauce. The key themes for the arguments for the ballot measure, if you're for it, take some notes. Number one reason people are going to vote for it, 1 million Californians living with unsafe drinking water deserve, right? We use the word deserve to have safe drinking water. And that is the thing that attracts people the most, voters the most, to vote for it. Number two, we kind of go through the narrative of wildfires, talking about the complex fire in Northern California, talking about Camp Fire that destroyed Paradise, talking about the bridge fire just this month. And that is very motivating for people because they believe this is going to be a solution or work towards a solution. Number three, they say spending today. They understand, this is something we test for all over the state. The public actually gets a little bit of economics. They understand how it works. They understand if you spend money today on infrastructure, then you're going to save money tomorrow because it's going to cost more money tomorrow. So those are the top three reasons people are supporting it. The messages that work against Prop 4 are less efficacious. They just don't have that same pull, but there are several of them. Number one, money goes to bureaucrats and their pensions. I mean, it's just a reality, right? Government's going to spend it, and that's how some of the money gets spent. Number two, Sacramento politicians, they squandered, we had a budget surplus, and now we don't. They kind of respond to that. Number three, it's $10 billion, and it's going to cost us, depending on the estimates, $16 to $20 million to pay back. They're moved by that and concerned by that. We already have $78 million in debt, bond debt, okay. And last, but still on there and significant, and something that you cannot ignore. Like, don't just assume because you have this strong belief in climate change and a need to take action that everybody else does. And don't assume you can dismiss those people. The idea that there's no real science behind this, and we're really not going to be able to mitigate for fire and really do anything significant for future water resources. So those are all things that the no side is going to exploit, assuming they have good polling data, and that's what's going to move people.
Awesome. Soren, I see you're nodding your head in agreement about a lot of that. What aspects of Proposition 4 do you think require more accountability and more transparency that would convince you slightly more?
I think a lot of folks in this room remember Prop 1 in 2014, and it was sort of the elephant in the room while we were talking about this, because Prop 1 did a lot of good things, but we've still got $2.7 billion that's allocated for surface storage that hasn't been spent. And so as we were talking about this proposition, one of the key sticking points when we were talking with legislators was, why should we throw more money at this when we haven't even gotten the money from a decade ago out the door? And I think that that's a fair question. You know, there are a lot of good things in Prop 4. There's a lot of money in there for things that are important in water that we should be spending money on. I'm a little bit less concerned about the transparency and accountability piece for this, because a lot of these pots are being funneled into existing grant programs that we've had a pretty good opportunity to figure out. You know, the groundwater money is going into a grant fund that's been used for almost a decade, and it works pretty well. So I have high hopes for the accountability and transparency piece, but I think there is a bigger conversation to be had about what are the obstacles that are being honestly created by ourselves to get this money out, and how do we prevent that from happening again?
Liz, what safeguards can be put in place to make sure that this spends the money on environmental issues that it promises to? Can you recommend a way that happens?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just going to build on what Soren just said. Prop 4 was designed to implement the state's existing plans to address climate impacts. For example, the funding is designed to implement the governor's water supply strategy and the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan. The funding flows through existing programs and is subject to legislative oversight and audits. And I also want to mention that the state's debt capacity. It's important to note the state's bond debts are low, and we can't afford to wait to address these issues related to climate change that are impacting the state, wildfires and droughts. The best bond management tool that we have is not to issue bonds until the cash is needed for the projects. And there are provisions in Prop 4 that allow the legislature to look at what the total debt capacity is at the state and determine when they should be issuing the bonds in order to meet the greatest need with the projects included in the bond.
Thank you. Adam, so just like every proposition, there are misconceptions about this. People are misunderstanding the point. In your research, what are some of the misconceptions?
I don't know that we've dived into that because nobody's paying us to, but I think it's let's put it this way. There's a very stereotypical response to this bond. And so I almost don't have to be here, right? You know who's supporting it and you know who's opposing it. I already told you the Bay Area is supporting it more. Surprise, surprise, Republicans are less supportive, Democrats are more supportive. So I think it just comes down to the impression of what bonds do and also the hopes of what it could accomplish versus the detriment of having the debt. I'll say it this way. If you look thematically at the proponents and the opponents, if you listen to what I just said earlier, the messages that drive people on the positive side, they're very aspirational, right? We're going to help people who don't have clean water. We're going to prevent wildfires. We're going to do these great things. So they're very aspirational. And the people who are opposing it, their theme is it costs too much. So I think that cost too much message is pretty compelling to a lot of people, but it's just not as exciting. It's not as sexy. It's not as fun as giving people clean water and preventing wildfires. So I think that's an important concept to understand, that this is very, very stereotypical partisan-wise and geography-wise, and there's not a lot of surprises here. It's really just going to be about getting out the vote for the right kind of people.
Thank you. Soren, how can the various water agencies collaborate with Aqua to make all this happen?
Well, the time to do that was like a year ago, candidly. We've been we've been working on this bond for a long time, and I think what's not evident to somebody who is not steeped in the swamp of Sacramento, as some of us are, is that this has been going on for a long time. We've been working on this bond as an organization longer than I have known my husband, which is a long time. And so, these things are iterative, and I think one of the takeaways for me from this bond exercise is that we don't have good water champions in the Capitol in the way that we used to. For a variety of reasons, the state has changed. People cycle out of the building a lot more with term limits. And so we don't have people in there who are going to go into the 3 or 4 person meeting where these things are hammered out and pound their fist and say, no, we need this for water. And it's sort of incumbent on the people in this room to steer the ship back in the other direction. Aqua has a very effective and sophisticated, if I do say so myself, government relations team, but it really comes down to the relationships that our members are building with their representatives. Your representative here would much rather go on a tour of your facility than come sit in my office and hear about priorities, right? And so I think it's time to start looking at the next bonds and start building the relationships and making the arguments now. They're going to build the foundation for the bond that we want to see, which, unfortunately isn't quite what we have in front of us now.
Liz, say Prop 4 loses. How will our environment be affected by that?
Yeah, absolutely. Climate change poses a critical risk to our ability to provide drinking water across the state. Making ongoing investments in resilience is one of the most important things that we can do. And most of the burden will fall on our local communities and our local water agencies if we can't find some public funding, including from the state, to help address these resiliency issues. So what's really critical to know is that Prop 4 provides funding now to help us address some of these most pressing issues. $610 million to help the state provide drinking water, $480 million to help improve dam safety. So really critical investments in providing water and providing safety across the state of California to our communities is at risk here with Prop 4.
Thank you. So Adam, let's get into the prognostication. We want you to predict the future, not only of Prop 4, but the top of the ticket, the voting in the swing states. No, we'll keep it to Prop 4.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, we can talk proper politics another time. In the case of Prop 4, we're seeing a strong majority support today. I showed about 59%. But there also really isn't a lot of money on either side, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's a bunch of money coming for the yes side. I don't know. There's not a lot of money spent here. Unless something significant happens, and there's a lot of time for significant things to happen, I suspect it passes. As I said, it has this aspirational look to it. It has a lot of support behind it that looks like things that I care about, right? If I'm thinking from a voter perspective. So I think it's got a pretty good shot. Low, we show about 20+% unsure, so it's not a lot of room to move. So I would suggest that it passes. And if there are monies on the pro side, they have great visuals, right? Liz just talked about dams. You know, I could make some awesome commercials with, dams cracking or with, fires encroaching on neighborhoods. And there's great visuals that are very compelling that you can use to support the bond measure. And again, I'm not knocking the no side, but what are they going to do to say vote no? It's just going to be like the money funnel or the dollar cut into pieces or whatever it is. It's just not that compelling or interesting to most people because you've got these amazing things that are supposedly going to be done with this thing. So if I've got to choose today based on that photograph in time, it passes. But give me the chance to come back in a few weeks if I need to.
So, Soren, you mentioned that it's almost too late for anything to change concerning Prop 4. You said, look to future propositions. Do you see anything coming down the pipeline that would catch our attention?
It's too early. I think everyone's focused on Prop 4 and see how it performs. Part of the reason that Prop 4, we didn't know that this was even going to happen until a few months ago. I mean, after years and years of going back and forth on will there be a bond, will there not be bond, Prop 1 in March, the governor's proposition really rattled Sacramento with its thin, margin of victory. And so I think folks are focused on seeing how this one performs before we look to what the next bond is. I think there will be another one, but it was part of the calculus for how seriously we took Prop 4 is we haven't had a significant water bond in a decade. You don't know when you're going to get another bite at the apple, and so it's really important to get it right when you do it. So we might have one in 2 years. We might be in dire financial straits and have no bonding capability. We just don't know. So I don't want to predict because I don't think anybody can.
Thank you. Liz, what else can environmentally oriented people do over and above Prop 4 to sort of push the issue forward, push climate action forward?
Yeah, climate change is not going to go away. So we need to continue to figure out how we can invest in climate resilience and obtain funding to help us address these climate impacts to California. So we're already looking towards what else we can do, what other investments we can make, and we want to work closely with the environmental and the water community to help make sure that we're getting the right funding into addressing the programs, addressing the climate impacts that we're seeing across California.
Thank you. Adam, any final thoughts on the work you're doing? Let me ask you a question. When you do research, when you do polling, is it just for one issue, or are you looking at other political issues? in the state of California? Is it, what I mean is the Prop 4 stuff ensconced in a whole bunch of other questions about other things?
Well, it's a great question. So the answer is typically we will have multiple issues in a statewide environment because there's a lot of things happening, so we get to give insight into a bunch of them. And if you look at other public polls like PPIC, obviously they do that poll and they query every single ballot measure. So I don't know if this is where you're going, but there is the chance that all those different topics, all those different ballot measures, all those different opinions are influenced by the next one. So that is something to consider. You know, when you look at that PPIC poll, or you look at anything from us even, we're very transparent about the ordering and how we do things. But there is the chance that if Prop 4, because we would typically rotate or randomize what we actually do, the different propositions. If Prop 4 was at the bottom and we talked about all these different topics and there's a little bit of fatigue going on, there could be a little bit of, mixing of numbers there. And so that's why campaigns themselves poll just for themselves. And people who do, things that are more publicly might mix them up. And so another thing I will point out is the likely voter model. That if there is any sort of secret sauce to what we do, that's what it is figuring out who's actually going to show up. And again, I'm just citing PPIC because they're very public about it. Their likely voter model looks very different than my likely voter model. And it's because we're in the business of winning elections and they're in the business of, telling people what people think. And so I would, I trust a pollster's number, someone who makes money at it, a little bit more than the people that just want to educate the world. And so that's another thing just to consider when you're looking at those numbers. Just know that they're not really in this to necessarily, predict outcomes. They're in this to kind of educate the world. And so, if you get a chance to see the real numbers, it's probably worthwhile.
Is there a demographic component here? I mean, if I had to guess, I would say that young people are more concerned about environmental issues. Liz, you can chime in on this too. So do you find there's a demographic bit in your polling?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there is an element of younger voters that is much more concerned. They are much more bought into the idea and comfortable engaging in climate change mitigation. Older people just are a little more entrenched in their beliefs. It's just too easy. When Larry's in the room, it's just too easy. And he's right in front of me.
Is he your friend? We wouldn't have seated him there. He's making faces and gestures. Is he giving you your notes? What's going on?
Larry Dick is tremendous. He's a wonderful, indicative person in the water board world. And I will say this, there's another factor here between men and women. Turns out women are just a little bit more compassionate than we are. They're a little bit more, they're a little bit better at looking towards the future. They just are. And so there is a higher percentage of women that are supporting this proposition, and that kind of feeds into the idea that they are more forward-thinking. This is just a fact. I'm not trying to make judgments here. And they are also, if you talk about water quality, women are always on the side of that expenditure, of that project to figure out how to make sure, higher quality water. Guys are just a little bit more reserved on that sort of thing.
So Soren, you're the neutral party here. Don't make us feel about you like we feel about the uncommitted voters in America, because we're all going, what? How can you be uncommitted at this point? How much more information do you need? So what would it take to get you off the dime to be other than a neutral participant?
Well, I didn't tell you how I'm voting on the bond. I just told you how Aqua feels about it.
Oh, okay.
and I'll keep that to myself, I think. I don't know, man. I mean, it is what it is. There's good things in there, you know? It's like, just because we didn't get everything we wanted does not mean it is a bad bond. And I don't really know what more to say about it than that, which is folks are going to make their own decision. I'm going to make my own decision. But as a corpus, Aqua had to take a step back, and that just was the way that it happened.
We respect that. Liz, do you feel with the severe weather events that we've had over the last 10 years, people, I'll preface this by saying I'm in the weather business, and one of the biggest questions we get, I'm not anymore, I'm retired, I relinquished my license, but people still ask me, so what do you think about climate change? And I say, I am not a climate scientist, but I was doing this job for 40 years, and I just know that the last 10 years, every single weather record has been broken. Extreme high and low temperatures, extreme number of tornadoes, the destructive quality of tornadoes, these hurricanes that we're seeing. For instance, Helena, that just went ashore in the panhandle of Florida, is the strongest hurricane ever to make landfall. I mean, there are all these indicators that things are afoot. Do you feel that more people are believing in the concept of climate change now, or we still have a lot of work to do to convince people we have to do something about it?
Yeah, I think especially in California, think about it. We are setting records for the biggest wildfires, the worst, most prolonged drought. Then we have incredible flooding that comes through. In California, we're experiencing all the climate impacts in all of our communities, extreme heat days. And so if we are acutely feeling them and we're seeing them and our communities are and our kids are experiencing these impacts from climate change, we got to figure out how we can invest in prevention, right? Let's figure out ways and solutions that we can provide funding to address the impacts that we're seeing in California from climate change.
You want to just hang on to that, Adam?
Yeah, Soren doesn't need any help, but Aqua is a client, so I'll maybe try to give some assistance here. Actually, the Nature Conservancy is also a client. I think
seems like a conflict of interest to me.
there's a lot of conflicts. I think what Soren's saying, and please correct me, is that to take it to the extreme, sometimes you only get one bite of the apple. Sometimes if you have success with Prop 4 in 2 years, maybe a water bond doesn't necessarily has a lower chance of success, because like people are thinking, oh, we just did that. I just gave you all this money, and so I think that is something that I think is probably in the back of all your minds, but you have to really think about the things you support and the outcomes you're looking for. Look, voters have a pretty short memory, and they're actually very forgiving. But there is still that chance that if you spend a bunch of money today and those monies get kind of really dispersed into a bunch of different projects, and you come back tomorrow for more money and say, oh, this is the real one for water, you may have a challenge on your hands, because you're certainly going to have the people that remember knowing that I just did that. And that's in a world where we're sometimes seeing elections, won by 2 or 3%, if I've got a baked-in group of 20 or 30% of people who say, I already did that, it becomes greater challenge the next time.
Yeah, in California, that happens all the time, because you see bond measures that don't make it in one election, and they reintroduce it, reworded the next time.
Yeah.
And people know they're being bamboozled by it. You know what I mean?
I mean, I don't know if they're being bamboozled, but they're being.
Oh, come on, Adam.
I'm a
not by you, but I mean the way they retool it and make it more acceptable to us.
Well, based on research, right? Based on our numbers. They come back and they ask those questions and they find those messages that move people. And the ones that didn't move them the first time, they find the next ones. They do a better job at the research and maybe do a little better job at raising money to promote their cause. But I'm a nonpartisan pollster, so I don't have a
minute there. You seemed offended by my whole line of questioning.
But very hard to offend me, Fritz.
No, I'm just kidding. All right, let's open it up to the audience. Anybody have a question for these wonderful speakers? Yes, sir.
a mic, or should I?
I want you to stand and project like you're in Broadway, and first identify yourself, what organization you're from, and then state your question.
Al Netterhood from MODOC, and Metropolitan Water, this last week, voted to support Prop 4.
Oh, there's a mic.
Voted to support Prop 4. As an outside observer, it seemed very clear to be a situation of one hand washes the other. A local senator was the one who brought up Prop 4 and is supporting it, and it was like, there's so much that isn't specific to water helpful, but it's a good thing, so let's go along with it. What some of you are hinting at, and I wanted to maybe get some deeper thoughts on, is a lot of people feel they were taken advantage of with Prop 1. And I think there's a lot more questioning about the value of these bonds because they are so expensive. And then you throw on the economic element where people are suffering from inflation. There's question marks about the future economic growth and all of those kinds of things. So I think there might be a surprise here with Prop 4. That
goes to Adam's earlier point. If you voted on something recently, you feel like, uh-oh, we've already paid for that, or we already didn't pay for that, so that memory sticks in their mind.
It's absolutely a factor.
Yeah.
But I think the bigger factor here is something I mentioned earlier, and that is I don't see a bunch of money showing up. So if Howard Jarvis Taxpayer Association raised $10 million and can be live on TV for the next 4 weeks, well then, there's a good chance you can move people off of it. But I don't see big money on either side, and this is a huge state. And so those numbers that are today, it's really hard to move those, pretty hard to move those without millions and millions of dollars.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am. Oh, no, she's the microphone lady. I'm sorry, she was.
Yes, I'm Pierce One, Irvine Ranch Water. Orange County represents, in Southern California, represents, roughly 2/3 of the population, and probably about that much going to the state, to the general fund to pay for the bond. So we do that. They use the water industry because they put water in there in order to sell the bond to people. So we help that if we support that. And then when it comes time to get the money out of the bond, you have to go up to Sacramento on bended knee and beg for the money to come back to do your projects. The irony of the situation is MWD is a regional utility that represents the same area. They could do the funding, but at MWD, you can't get them to raise the rates to even cover their ongoing expenses. But that's the place that it should be done. Then the money stays exactly where it is paid into, and you get the projects built faster than if you go through the state project. So as a consequence, I haven't supported a water bond since they hard-coded in, money coming to Orange County and funding SAPA equal to the population in the SAPA region. And I would urge people here not to support the bond for that exact reason. Thank you. And you can comment on that, the people who are for it, or against it. Thanks.
Do we have an opposing viewpoint? Folks, you want to comment on that? Soren?
One of our arguments when we were talking about the money that should go into the bond for water was an equity argument and an affordability argument. Orange County is blessed with a lot of resources that other places in California are not, but the grid has to work well together, whether or not, where the infrastructure is a rich area or a poor area. So I think that there is an importance to sending money to places that don't have money for water infrastructure for that reason. And to the point about raising rates, you are all aware that water rates are going up across the state, and I don't notice it on my bill, but a lot of people do. 10 or 20% is meaningful if it happens year after year. And, I know where I am right now, but the state's tax system is generally more progressive than a water bill, right? Someone who makes $1 million a year is probably going to pay something similar on their water to the person next to them who makes $60,000 a year. And so there is a role for the state to fill in the cracks, and I think that's an appropriate role for government. But again, I know I'm in Orange County, so I'll...
Adam or Liz, any comments on that?
Yeah, I mean, just to add like what I already said, again, if we're expecting climate change to cost the state of California $113 billion annually, we need to figure out public sources of funding that can help address these impacts and to making sure that we are meeting the needs of Californians across all of the state.
Pay now or pay later. Adam?
So everybody loves Pure Swan. Yeah. And Pure brings up an interesting point, and a point that we all know. Orange County contributes, you can say, a larger amount, an unfair amount of our monies to the state. And there's a problem with that conversation, with that message for the broader California. And that is, it's really hard, it's really hard for them to see Orange County as the underdog. And that's where our challenge lies, because we're always going to be in that place, Pierre, and you know that, and everybody else knows that. We don't have the legislative power, and we have this wealth and ease of life and awesomeness that we all love, and no one feels sorry for Orange County, and no one is going to step up to somehow regulate how those monies are allocated. It's just not going to happen. I don't mean to be fatalistic, but no one sees us as an underdog.
Adam, what I said is the Met service area, which is 60% of the population of the state, has lots of poor people, has lots of environmental needs. They could fund it and could be built faster and cheaper if it was done that way than sending money to Sacramento, where you know what happens to that money. It doesn't go to where it's intended to be at all. Okay.
Anyone else?
I have a question. Thank you. And I'll just add my no vote to my colleagues. And I think we believe the state has squandered the billions of dollars that we voted for with Prop 1 10 years ago. We haven't seen a drop of water from that, and that's until they spend that money wisely, spend any of the money wisely and create water. I'm not going to vote for another bond that includes this. My question is for Soren and for Adam, or for all three. I think Aqua, as the state water industry, has the infrastructure of people to put our own water solely measure on the ballot. And I've been trying to advocate and communicate that with all the local chapters or what have you, because in the politics, we don't have the power to say no to the legislature, because these water bonds that we want, they get influenced by other causes, and it brings down, I think we need a pure water, and have you thought about, can you think about using your infrastructure? And we have a lot of engineering companies that would help, because we can't pay for it, they can, to put something like that on the ballot that's really what we want as the water industry. If that for Mr. Probolsky and our Aqua representative. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I understand your question. And you're right, Aqua does support and run its own legislation all the time. That's something we know how to do. Prop 4 is a good example of politics is the art of the possible. And a lot of the reason that you see more money in Prop 4 for trail construction than you do for water conveyance is that was what was going to get it passed. So I think before we have a conversation about let's run our own proposition that we want to see, let's focus on building the relationships and making the arguments and changing the culture of that building. And then I think that comes after that, it's much harder to do that.
Let me clarify my question.
Okay.
I don't mean the legislature's you're going to do what you said.
Yeah.
Having our own signature gathering initiative process to go around the legislature. Because what you said about working with them, sir, I've heard that before you got here for many years, and I'm going to hear it when you're gone. It doesn't work. We don't have it. We need to go on our own and come up with what we want as an industry, and then present it to the voters through the signature gathering initiative process.
Okay.
That's why I brought up the infrastructure, using the infrastructure to do that.
Yeah, I appreciate the clarification. I'll note you're sitting at the same table as Aqua's board president.
One more question. One more question, and not from management. One more question.
Yeah.
Anybody? There we go.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Howard Hull. I'm a guest of Mesa. I'm on the board of Ducks Unlimited, probably heard of its largest wetlands conservation organization in the world. One of the things I went, Adam, I'd like you to address, and in the marketing aspect of it, the pros and cons. As you were saying, there's money. We're seeing money dumped in on both sides, and you and I understand that in the political. But I think maybe you can also address social media and how social media is affecting us in communicating our ideas these days between Facebook, Instagram, and linked up, or I can link you a YouTube, and you can see a quick YouTube video on a topic. And I'll give you an example. In 2000, we're running an election with the president continues said he was a Vietnam War hero on swift boats out in Vietnam. And they put together $250,000 together and put together a little promo that was linked to YouTube. It went out across the United States, and within 3 weeks, it undermined his entire campaign. Now, things have progressed over that in the last 24 years, but how are you seeing that affect that? Because you have your pulse on, I think, your finger better than a lot of us, how we can positively use that.
No one is taking a break from their racist rant on Nextdoor to talk about Prop 4. So, I think that social media, obviously, we all know dramatically influences people's opinions. I'll say Prop 4 is not going to be a big topic of conversation, even among the young people who want clean water and trails, and it's just not going to be a big topic of conversation. I think what you're saying, what you're referring to, is the general flavor, how people are really pigeonholed into their community, into their ideas, and look to find people who agree with them. That's the challenge that we have, and that's why we're so polarized. I'll say another thing that Director Sheldon brought up. This idea of going out there and starting your own water bond and raising the money to do it, I think it's great. I think the idea of having something that's laser focused on the things that you care about and that are going to fund the projects that you want to fund and dispense with everything else, I think it could pass. The challenge is, I mean, I know how much most of you raise as directors, and it's thousands of dollars, not tens of thousands, not hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I know your bandwidth and your willingness to go to those engineering firms and those construction firms and the willingness to get them to write checks. I think it's a fantastic idea, Steve. I just think there's the challenge that this is not a crowd that is ready to go raise $20 million or trained to do it. If you all want that training, Steve can teach you how. But I just don't see that happening because you're not good at that.
Ouch.
One more question. No, never mind, we're too late. How about giving our guests a great round of applause? Adam, Soren, and Liz. Now, before we take a 15-minute break, here's what you need to do. Take your phone and take a picture of the QR codes on your table, and then you'll be part of a sort of a sample. And then when we come back, we'll give the results at the beginning of the next program. All right? See if you can do that.